How great a scientist was Abdus Salam? This is a question of great importance to Pakistanis. On the one hand, there are those who want to praise him to the skies, and on the other, there are many who refuse to recognize him as a great scientist, and this is because of religious prejudice. Abdus Salam was an Ahmadi, and Ahmadis are not considered Muslims in Pakistan and are also the subject of intense religious persecution. In our school books, children do not hear of Abdus Salam. On the other hand, they learn about those people who are alleged scientific heroes, but of whom the world of science has never heard of. Let's look at the facts. Abdus Salam got the Nobel Prize in Physics, absolutely the highest award in that field, in 1979 for unifying two of nature's fundamental forces, and so helped us understand the basic elements of matter and how basic particles interact with each other. This led to the discovery eventually of the Higgs boson, for which another Nobel Prize was given in 2014. Apart from this, Salam pioneered work in renormalization theory. He helped construct a new way of looking at supersymmetric particles, and he predicted proton decay. Now, proton decay unfortunately has not been found in spite of many intense efforts, but people are still looking at it, and it's something that could be very important. At the European Nuclear Research Laboratory called CERN, there is a street that is named after Abdus Salam. He has also been honored in many countries. Salam also had a very inspiring personality, and this is why he was able to found the International Center for Theoretical Physics in Trieste, Italy. Today, it has grown into a huge institution where thousands of scientists from across the third world visit it. It has now been renamed as the Abdus Salam International Center for Theoretical Physics. Who can doubt that Abdus Salam was a great scientist? However, people tend to exaggerate. They want to make Abdus Salam appear even bigger than what he actually was. And so they invent things. For example, very recently there was an article that was published in a Pakistani newspaper which reads as follows. One day, when Professor Salam was studying in Princeton, New Jersey, he met Professor Einstein casually on the campus of the Institute for Advanced Study. Einstein asked him, "What kind of research are you doing?" Salam replied, "I'm working on the renormalization theory." To which Einstein replied, "I'm not interested in that." After a few moments of silence, Einstein asked the Pakistani, "Have you studied my relativity theory?" Salam replied, "I'm not interested in that." Now, this is not only wrong, it's ridiculously wrong. Renormalization theory, on which Salam worked on as a student and for some time after that, is based 100% on Einstein's theory of relativity, and every particle physicist knows that. Furthermore, Salam was never a student at Princeton University. Yes, he did visit it for a meeting and for a conference, and he might have encountered Einstein over there, but Salam would never have told the most famous scientist of his time, one whose work was fundamental to Salam's own work, that "I'm not interested in what you're doing." That simply makes no sense. Of course, Salam was a very great scientist, and the Salam-Weinberg-Glashow model, as it once used to be called, is now called the standard model of particle physics. It's called that because it tells us how the most basic particles in the world interact with each other, and so we get an insight into the deepest mysteries of nature itself. The Standard Model has been tested again and again, thousands of times in experiments across the world, and no error has been found to date. This is why the work of Salam and Weinberg especially was of the greatest importance to 20th century physics. There were people who wanted to stop Salam from getting the Nobel Prize. They did not have a religious problem with him, but they did have personal and professional problems perhaps. But they couldn't succeed because that work was so excellent. Having said all this, let's now be realistic. Abdus Salam was a great scientist, but you cannot elevate him to the level of Isaac Newton or Albert Einstein, or even physicists like Richard Feynman or Paul Dirac. Their contributions were at a far more fundamental level. Salam would certainly have agreed to this. He would never have tried to claim that he was at the level of Newton or Einstein or Feynman or Dirac. In conclusion, I think we Pakistanis have even more reason to be proud of Abdus Salam. He came from very humble origins. He was born in a small town, Jhang, which was perfectly ordinary. The school he went to didn't even have chairs. They would sit on the floor. The first time Salam saw an electric light was when he went to Lahore at the age of 14, and yet rose to become one of the finest physicists in the world. I'm sure that what I've said here may have offended some of his admirers as well as those who don't like him. But science is about objectivity, and so it is necessary. It is incumbent upon us to be objective about scientists as well. How does modern science look upon matters of faith and religion? Can a scientist really be religious, and to what extent can the pursuit of science be separated from the practice of religion? These are very perplexing questions, and depending upon which scientists you talk to, you'll get different answers. But it's very interesting to compare the views of two very great scientists and some of the most brilliant thinking minds who have reflected upon the fundamental constituents of matter and the fundamental forces in nature. On the one hand, there is Abdus Salam, a man who got the Nobel Prize in physics for unifying the weak and the electromagnetic interactions. Abdus Salam believed himself to be a Muslim, and in fact, he was legally one until 1974, when by an act of the Pakistani Parliament, his community, the Ahmadis, were declared non-Muslims. But this only strengthened his faith and his belief that his inspiration for doing science actually comes from the Quran.
Allah Ta'ala ने कुरान करीम में 750 आयत नाजिल फरमाई हैं साइंस के बारे में. बहुत खूब. 250 आयत कुरान करीम की लेजिस्लेटिव हैं, 750 साइंस के बारे में, जिसमें साइंस कायनात के मुख्तलिफ मज़ाहिर पे अल्लाह ताला के मज़ाहिर साइंस के ज़रिए जिन जिन चीज़ों से होते हैं उनका जिक्र है. और मुसलमानों को बार बार ये कहा गया है.
Salam put his motivation for seeking the unification of the forces on the concept of Tawheed, the uniqueness of God.
I would never have started to work on this subject if I was not a Muslim, if I had not believed in Tawheed. If you are a particle physicist, you would like to have just one fundamental force and not four. That's the real unity between the forces. If you're a Muslim particle physicist, of course you'll believe in this very, very strongly, because unity is an idea which is very attractive to you culturally. But if you are not a Muslim fundamental for particle physicists, then you may or may not believe this. This was the reason why we have scored over others in that sense.
In yet another interview, Salam says that his search for particles which are more elementary than the quark and the electron also comes from the Islamic notion of unity, tawheed or wahdat.
That the present thinking is that the quarks and the electrons, which we now believe to be the fundamental particles, are not fundamental objects. There are things called pre-quarks or pre-quarks. And there again, we would like to have just one kind of stuff, not 18 quarks and 4 electron-like objects. We would just like to have one stuff. And then that stuff should be similar, should have the same properties as the force and matter. But why? Why we are so fascinated by this oneness? For my case, it's clear. It's the wahda, which comes from my wahdat fil Islam.
Salam's work, of course, was excellent physics. It earned him the Nobel Prize, and we got a deep insight into the fundamental constituents of matter. But on the other side of the Atlantic was Steven Weinberg, who had arrived at the same theory almost simultaneously. In fact, just a few months earlier, he had published his paper on the unification of weak and electromagnetic forces. But Weinberg has a very different outlook on life and on religion. Here is what he has to say.
The God of traditional Judaism and Christianity and Islam seems to me a terrible character. He's a God who's obsessed with the degree to which people worship him and anxious to punish with the most awful torments those who don't worship him in the right way. Now, I realize that many people don't believe in that anymore who call themselves Muslims or Jews or Christians, but that is the traditional God, and he's a terrible character. Many people do simply awful things out of sincere religious belief, not using religion as a cover, the way Saddam Hussein may have done, but really because they believe that this is what God wants them to do, going all the way back to Abraham being willing to sacrifice Isaac because God told him to do that. Putting God ahead of humanity is a terrible thing.
This, of course, is Weinberg's personal opinion, and one may or may not agree with him. But about 40 years ago, when I took a course from him in quantum mechanics at MIT, I was certainly not aware of his philosophical or religious leanings. When I heard that he is often called a Jewish atheist, I was intrigued by the term and sent him an email asking for a clarification. Here's what he wrote. Pervez, I have never belonged to any organized religion, so in this sense I never was a Jew, but Jew can, like Arab or Kurd, refer to a member of an ethnic group, usually with a sense of common feeling with other members of the group. In that sense, I am and have always been a Jew. I suppose that you could say that I'm an ex-deist, as I had some vague belief in God until about age 10. All best, Steve. Weinberg's point of view is clearly the diametrical opposite of Abdus Salam's, and yet these two great minds came to exactly the same theory of physics, the nature of fundamental particles, a view into the very guts of nature, in spite of having these very different philosophical attitudes. So how is this possible? About 25 years ago, I wrote a little book. It's called Islam and Science, Religious Orthodoxy and the Battle for Rationality. I requested Professor Salam to write the preface, but didn't really expect that he would agree because we have such a different point of view on some matters. But to my great surprise, he not only agreed, but he wrote. In fact, I do not disagree with Dr. Hoodbhoy on anything that he has written in this book. And then he goes on. I'll just read a part which is relevant to the issue of unification of Weinberg on the one hand and Salam on the other doing the same thing. He wrote, "The author also quotes Stephen Weinberg's and my research and says it made no basic difference to our work whether I was an avowed believer and Weinberg an avowed atheist. I can confirm that he is right. We were both geographically and ideologically remote from each other when we conceived the same theory of physics for unifying the weak and the electromagnetic forces. If there was any bias towards the unification paradigm in my thinking, it was unconsciously motivated by my background as a Muslim." In 1986, Salam and I wrote the preface to a book. It was by two scientists, John Ziman and Michael Moravcik. It's called On the Road to Worldwide Science. I'll just read a few lines from this essay. "One can persuasively argue that science is the natural outcome of human intelligence. Rational man has emerged from the realms of biological evolution, endowed with innate mental structures capable of abstract thought. Epistemological and linguistic research bring evidence that humans are intricate pre-wired computers needing only external stimuli to set cognitive and creative processes into operation." This is co-signed by Abdus Salam and myself. To conclude, a lot of people these days want to extract scientific facts from various holy books. But this is so utterly useless. As the example of Weinberg and Salam shows so brilliantly, a scientist can have this ethnicity or that. He can belong to this country or that country. He may have this religious belief or no religious belief, as in the case of Weinberg, and yet they can all agree. This is so reassuring in a world where there are so many differences and divisions within us, but we can all agree on a basic measure of what is true. What did Professor Abdus Salam have to do with the making of Pakistan's atomic bomb? There are lots of different notions about this, and it seems as if people believe in what they want to believe in. So on the one side, you have those who say that the very idea came from Salam, that he was crucial to it, that we wouldn't have had the bomb without him. And then there are those who say he had absolutely nothing to do with it, he was insufficiently patriotic. And then there are those among the right-wing Islamist parties of Pakistan who accuse him of sabotaging the effort. There's a third opinion that Salam was a man of peace and therefore could not have worked on the bomb as a matter of principle and therefore did not have anything to do with it. So you see, it's awfully confusing. How do you get to the truth? That can only be done by systematically looking at facts. In 1963, Salam made his first comment about nuclear weapons. He was reviewing a book for new scientists. It was called The Spread of Nuclear Weapons, authored by Leonard Beaton and John Maddox. In this review, Salam approvingly quotes what the authors have written. "The Indian program has an inescapable shape. It suggests clearly that the Indian government has consciously and intentionally equipped itself with an option to decide to build nuclear weapons, with undoubtedly the possibility, assuming continued Canadian abstinence, of being the fifth power to explode a nuclear device." Now, Salam also says that the spread of nuclear weapons is inevitable. By 1963, Salam was already a celebrity in the world of physics, and he was the youngest fellow of the Royal Society. His talents were noted by President Ayub Khan, who appointed him as his scientific advisor. Salam recommended to Ayub Khan that Pakistan set up the Atomic Energy Commission, and he further suggested that Pakistan acquire a reactor from Canada similar to that the Indians had obtained. This could be useful both for generating power as well as for other things. One of Salam's role models was Dr. Homi Bhabha. Bhabha was a brilliant, Cambridge-educated physicist who later on became the central figure for India's bomb program. Salam knew many of the great physicists of his times, including J. Robert Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer was the man who headed the Manhattan Project that led to the creation of America's first atomic bomb. But Oppenheimer refused to work on the hydrogen bomb, which was immensely more destructive. The story of Pakistan's quest for the atomic bomb begins just 6 weeks after the West Pakistani army surrendered to the Indian army in Dhaka on the 16th of December 1971. It was a moment of tremendous humiliation for Pakistan, and on the 24th of January 1972, President Zulfikar Ali Bhutto summoned all the relevant scientists in Pakistan with a special invitation to Abdus Salam to be present at a meeting in Multan where he demanded of them, "You must make the bomb."
Present were Professor Abdus Salam, later to win a Nobel Prize, Ishrat Usmani, head of the Pakistan Atomic Energy Commission, and Munir Khan, who was to succeed him. The date, 1972.
It was rather, like a jamboree, It was there was a great deal of enthusiasm and joy, and these were, the early days, and, Bhutto could have, Bhutto had said that anything, he could have got away with anything, his authority was unquestioned, and loyalty to Bhutto was unquestioned, and he was looked upon as the great Messiah. So he got all these boys together, and there were senior people, very senior people, and junior people, youngsters, and he said, look, we're going to have a bomb. We're going to have a party. And he said, can you give it to me? So, they started shouting like school children, They said, oh, yes, you can have it, you can have it, you can have it.
The enthusiasm for the bomb was clearly very much there. But where would the material that goes into the core of the bomb come from? The fissile material. And here is where Abdus Salam's advice to Ayub Khan had paid off. The Canadians had delivered their nuclear reactor, and just 10 months after the Multan meeting, President Bhutto inaugurated the Karachi nuclear power plant.
जनाब भुट्टो ने फ्रांस से एटमी रिप्रोसेसिंग प्लांट खरीदने का मुआहदा किया। अमेरिका ने पाकिस्तान के पुरअमन एटमी प्रोग्राम को खत्म करने के लिए शदीद दबाव डाला। पाकिस्तान ने बैनुल-अक़वामी ज़मानतें मुहैया करने पर आमादगी जाहिर की। बाद में फ्रांस ने अपनी शराइत की खिलाफवर्जी का बहाना बनाकर रिप्रोसेसिंग प्लांट का मुआहदा मनसूख कर दिया। लेकिन जनाब भुट्टो अपनी आखिरी सांसों तक अपने इस मौक़िफ़ पर डटे रहे।
Roughly around this time, somewhere in 1972, Abdus Salam summoned Riazuddin from Islamabad and told him to come to the International Center for Theoretical Physics in Trieste, where Salam was director. Riazuddin had been Salam's student, and at Imperial College London he had done a very good thesis in elementary particle physics. He was a good physicist, and Salam tasked him with developing the theoretical basis for Pakistan's bomb. So now Riazuddin would have to develop a theoretical physics group that would look into the various aspects of physics related to a bomb explosion. Although Pakistan was forced into abandoning the plutonium route, it did succeed by another way, and Riazuddin was decorated with a high national honor for having laid the theoretical foundations of the bomb. In his unpublished memoirs, the late Professor Riazuddin recalls that sometime in December 1973, he had accompanied Salam and Munir Ahmad Khan to the Wah explosive factory and met with the head, Lieutenant General Qamar Ali Mirza. He says, "That's where I saw TNT for the first time, and an explosive called Composition B, which is needed for the making of nuclear weapons for the implosion mechanism." India's test in 1974 was to hugely accelerate the Pakistani search for the bomb. Salam is not known to have done any bomb calculations himself. And there's a clear reason for that, because the making of a bomb, the physics of it, has become simpler and simpler with the passage of time. So although it does need a good theoretical physicist to head the project, yet it would have been a waste of time for a man with such talent as Salam to have engaged in simple or relatively simple calculations. But then the question is, why did Salam want the bomb in the first place? There's no clear answer to that, but let's remember that 1947 was a time of tremendous carnage, where Muslims killed Hindus and Hindus killed Muslims, and more than 1 million people died in the tragic events of partition. But with the passage of years, Salam's position on nuclear weapons changed, and it changed dramatically. In 1981, he expressed the view that wanting nuclear weapons is an act of madness. So what changed Salam? I think there were two reasons. The first is easy to understand. In 1974, the Ahmadis, Salam's religious community, were declared non-Muslims, heretics, by an act of the Pakistani parliament, and subsequently became the most persecuted religious community in Pakistan. So clearly, Salam must have lost enthusiasm just on account of this. But I don't think that that was the only reason or even the main reason. Salam lived in a milieu of international scientists, people who came from every part of the world, had different religions, had different nationalities, and thought differently. Among his collaborators was Jogesh Pati, a Hindu of Indian descent. With Pati, he wrote some pioneering papers, including one that inspired a massive search for decay of the proton. As the founder-director of the International Center for Theoretical Physics, an institution dedicated to spreading science across the world, particularly in developing countries, Salam found himself advocating disarmament, world peace, and turning swords into plowshares. He lectured politicians on this.
Do you have any message for the politicians?
For politicians, well, first of all, they should get rid of nuclear weapons, I think. That's the only message which one could make for the politicians.
To conclude, the young Salam and the older Salam were really two very different people. The younger one was still dealing with the bitterness of the past and therefore sought nuclear weapons. But the older one had transcended that and had come to realize the commonality of all peoples on this planet. One so wishes that all scientists, in fact all people, realize this sooner rather than later.